Well, let me move to the open source world. You spent several years at Mandrake Software and also in the open source community. Uh, Open source has had some amazing success, clearly, Linux and a whole bunch of solutions. Companies have also done really well, and you pointed out with MySQL and others as well. So we've had some amazing success in the last 15 to 20 years with open source software. But as you look ahead right now, as I see, especially the larger uh, cloud-based providers such as Amazon or Azure or Google, they don't seem to be that true to the open source world anymore. So what do you think is happening? Do you think is the pendulum swinging back in the other direction, or what is IBM with their, Red Hat? It's not really open source anymore, but what is your point of view on open source and the future of open source? And where do you see this headed right now?
Okay, first of all, I think that the open source movement is probably the most important change that happened in the last 40 years. Okay, so I think Richard Stallman changed the world because he changed the way people develop. Okay, we used to all develop in our little corner, and after all, object orientation was about reuse, right? We're going to build this object that we're going to reuse. Okay, but Stallman made it happen because he said that what's important is to build communities that share common resources. Okay, so my conjecture is that the productivity of software development was multiplied by 10 between, let's say, 1990 and 2010, okay? Not because we used different technology, but because we started sharing and reusing components and so on, okay? So the way developers work now is totally different from the way they used to work with with the screen. Now they work with the community and they reuse resources. Okay, so what's the future of open source? First of all, open source already won, right? Because about 100% of companies in the world use open source.
That is correct.
I'm sure, the persistent community uses open source every day, right? Okay, so, and it was not obvious in the beginning, right? For instance, Microsoft was strongly against it and so on. And they all changed because they were smart, right? And they adopted, but they keep fighting it. You're right to mention Amazon. The recent story of Amazon kind of taking over the Elasticsearch technology and community is an example of what can happen. I still think the share of the market taken by open source is growing every year. Okay, not so much in terms of US dollars because it remains around 10%, but in terms of number of lines of code written, and I still think that this is there is an ongoing fight to keep the open source idea alive and working well, and that some major players, essentially those who control the cloud, have a tendency to go back to vendor locking, because one of the promises of open source is to get rid of vendor locking, right? So you're not stuck. If you're not happy with your vendor, you move to another one. You take your software to persistent and tell them, take care of it now. But there is an ongoing struggle, but I am confident that the open source people will keep winning because the approach is so efficient and so